Transfer news and more spring game takeaways after the stinger. Hello and welcome to episode 40 of Good Morning College Football. I'm Nicholas Ian Allen of CFB Winning Edge and CampusToCanton.com. Thank you so much for joining us on this Wednesday morning, which I just looked it up. We are 122 days away from week 0 of the 2024 college football season. And that is, of course, both a long time for things to change, but also a lot of things are coming into focus. Personally, just on a personal note, I could kind of see the end, or the light at the end of the tunnel. I've mentioned it probably every show that we've done the last 6 weeks or so, that our CFB Winning Edge team profiles, 2024 team profiles, are going to be published to our C2C Winning Edge and all 22 tier members at CampusToCanton.com in early May. We will be talking ACC Power Rankings on Friday, which is our last power conference to discuss, and then we'll be turning our attention to the Group of Five. And part of the reason we've been working so slowly through those power conference teams is we are very, very meticulous when it comes to building those team profiles, especially early on. Then we do ramp up the pace a little bit. And so for the next, 2 weeks or so, it's going to be a sprint, but I'm seeing that light at the end of the tunnel and feel pretty good about where we are sitting now, that those will be available, like I said, to our C2C Winning Edge and all 22 tier members. May 8th is the day that we are now focused on. So very excited to that, but of course, very excited about that. But of course, we are also excited about all of our members at CampusToCanton.com, where you can join for as little as $2.99 per month. And of course, we thank you for joining us here live. We thank you for giving this video a like on the Campus to Canton YouTube channel, and also subscribing while you're there to that YouTube channel, Campus to Canton, and CampusToCanton.com. So with that in mind, we have a few more spring games to discuss, some more higher profile games that we didn't get to on Monday, including Oklahoma, Notre Dame, North Carolina, a long list of ACC teams that we'll be discussing today in anticipation for that power rankings discussion at the end of the week. But first, and it's sort of randomized a little bit. I just put it in the show sheet sort of as news happened, with some very minor adjustments here and there. But we've had quite a bit of transfer movement. And of course, if you want to see how these transfer moves impact our returning production numbers, our 2024 returning production database is, of course, available to those top tier subscribers at Campus to Canton. But a lot of, maybe not super well known names, but players who are going to impact certainly some particular units, offensive line, defensive line, some added depth. And some key players in the secondary, some experienced players hitting the portal. But the first name on our list may or may not be the most impactful, but a returning national award winner. Alabama has added the Lou Groza Award winner Graham Nicholson, who was transferred from Miami of Ohio to the Crimson Tide. So that kicking situation should be in good hands in Tuscaloosa moving forward for Kalen DeBoer's inaugural season with Alabama. At Miami, a few high-profile players or perhaps guys who many expected to be contributors. Of course, we know that Henry Parrish, the running back, leading rusher for the Hurricanes, entered the transfer portal early in spring camp. He is now officially headed back to Ole Miss, announced that commitment a couple of days ago. Parrish, who started his career with the Rebels, moved on to Miami, had some success there, but headed back to Oxford now officially, it sounds like. But on the defensive line, kind of some interesting new news this week. Jared Harrison Hunt, who was a starter for the Hurricanes up front last season, and another potential impact player on that defensive line as well. I missed my first name here, Jaden Wayne. Those two are headed to the transfer portal. Caught some folks by surprise, perhaps. Reading into it a little bit, some of our usual sources for information, the On3 sites, the 247 sites that cover Miami, kind of hinted that perhaps these were among the players who are maybe being pushed out the door a little bit. That is something to keep in mind when you hear, transfer news, whether it's 3 or 4 guys announcing their intentions to enter the transfer portal in the same day. And maybe if you're a fan of that particular team, you might think, oh, gee, what's going on? Why are we losing these players? But sometimes, especially if a team is over the scholarship limit, which is, somewhat common this time of the year, that some of these conversations as spring practice is wrapping up, a player might, one, read the writing on the wall, depending on what level of reps they've been getting in the spring, one, what type of players and what particular positions is the coaching staff actively pursuing in the transfer portal. But also, sometimes it just, with a conversation with a coach, just becomes apparent that maybe it's best for both parties to move on. So I'm not sure exactly the situation on Harrison Hunt or Wayne or honestly anybody else that we will mention here today, but that's just something to keep in mind. Sometimes these players are moving on for better opportunities. Sometimes these players are moving on maybe it wasn't necessarily fully their idea, and also sometimes maybe it's been agreed that it's the best for both parties. So something to again keep in mind as we discuss any transfer portal news this spring. A little bit of a surprise, it sounded like Sun Devil source, who we've mentioned plenty, does a great job covering Arizona State for 247 Sports, was among those that expressed a little bit of a surprise that Ed Woods, the veteran secondary starter for the Sun Devils, entered his name into the transfer portal. So Ed Woods is among now one of a few experienced defensive backs who are now on the open market. Arkansas's Lorando Thomas was also among that group, and Texas lost a starter in the secondary from last year's team, Terrence Brooks, to the transfer portal. So there certainly are some experienced players who are entering in. Maybe none of those are, household names. Again, Thomas got sort of the strongest reaction that I saw. Perhaps somebody who is going to get some very high profile suitors you could expect, but definitely some experience now on the open market, and a little bit of a surprising bit of news with a couple of those as well. Colorado is certainly, as always, active. There's plenty of discussion about what has been going on in Boulder in terms of the transfer portal. The running back position certainly has had some movement in recent days, where the Buffs added Dalen Hayden, the transfer from Ohio State, kind of squeezed out a little bit there, especially with the addition of Quinshawn Judkins earlier this year. And as a result, 2 Colorado running backs have since entered the transfer portal. The biggest name among them, Dylan Edwards, who was actually the starter in Boulder last season, had a huge game in week 1, but wasn't really able to get going early or really throughout the course of the season as a runner. A little bit more impactful as a receiver, but somebody who is a highly rated player coming out of high school. Had been committed to Notre Dame. I think there was maybe some mention that Kansas State was also in the mix as well. I'm not sure if he was actually committed there prior to Notre Dame or not. I believe I saw that, but sounds like K-State, and due to a connection with Avery Johnson, who is taking over as starting quarterback there, maybe is the team to beat right now for Dylan Edwards, but somebody who displayed some explosive playmaking ability after week one. The stats maybe weren't quite there, but somebody who seemingly has a fairly bright future, and a lot of close ties to Deion Sanders. That was, of course, part of the reason why he flipped from Notre Dame to Colorado. But that seemingly has run its course, and Edwards is going to be moving on. So Hayden was already likely to be in line for a pretty heavy workload, but with Edwards moving on, and also Sevion Wilkerson, who was the third leading rusher for Colorado last season, actually led the running back room with 3 rushing touchdowns, second on the team to quarterback Shedeur Sanders, has also entered the transfer portal. Wilkerson was somebody who followed Coach Prime from Jackson State. So that room seemingly clearing out for Dallin Hayden to take on quite a heavy workload, but of course Colorado being listed in a lot of players, top 3, top 5 at this point in the spring. So don't be surprised if there's some competition added there for Hayden. But as of right now, seems like he's going to be in line for that number 1 running back spot. Only played in 3 games last year, 19 carries, 110 yards, and 1 touchdown. Was more of a factor in 2022 when Travion Henderson was really hampered by some injuries, got a pretty heavy workload later in the season for the Buckeyes. But somebody that, I know in our Campus to Canton CFF Slack channel, there's been some excitement, some anticipation about where Hayden would end up. Maybe not the biggest cheer when it came when the news broke that Colorado was going to be it, but still a player to know beyond just a somewhat lackluster stat line last season. The defensive line is maybe the hottest position group in the transfer portal. Several players have made decisions one way or the other. A few high-profile signings, potential major impact players, but also a few more added to the mix. Bill Norton, who started his career at Georgia, transferred to Arizona, where he was a starter last year. He has committed to Texas, did so over the weekend at the Texas spring game. Rival Oklahoma, who we'll talk about a little bit more later, added Jermaine Lowell, highly experienced defensive lineman, formerly, most recently at Louisville, prior to that at Arizona State. One defensive lineman who was expected to be maybe the top player at the position on the open market very quickly took himself off the market with Jay Toa going back to UCLA after 2 days maybe in the portal. So big news for UCLA, which that roster is not in the best position, and losing Toa, who probably head and shoulders the best player on that roster, certainly at a position of great need across college football. So getting him back, big for the Bruins as they transition to the Big Ten, and keeping him perhaps away from some of those new Big Ten rivals. Certainly some SEC teams were expected to be in hot pursuit as well. One Big Ten defensive line that took a big hit, Derek Harmon, at Michigan State, is now the top-rated defensive lineman in the transfer portal, according to 247 Sports. Their updated list has Harmon as number 9 overall. So he is certainly going to be very busy fielding calls, probably taking visits very soon. So Harmon, certainly somebody to keep an eye on. He rates lower in our individual player ratings than a lot of the sort of reactions would indicate on Twitter. Defensive line, pretty tough, especially in the interior, to rack up production points, which we use to try to help prop up individual player ratings for players who are maybe a little bit underrated, not quite totally appreciated. coming out of high school as we adjust for experience and production. Harmon is somebody who's mid-80s right now in our individual play ratings. Once he gets a fully updated transfer rating, I wouldn't be surprised if he gets bumped up a little bit, especially considering, right now, top defensive lineman uncommitted by 247 Sports, and somebody that, folks that I respect their opinion were kind of giving a wow. Harmon is going to be a really, really good get for somebody when the news first broke earlier this week. Keyron Crawford, perhaps unheralded, underrated, a name that not very many are familiar with, transferred, entered the portal. We mentioned it very briefly when he was among a few Arkansas State defenders to enter the portal earlier this week. He has now signed with Auburn. Big news for the Tigers, who also just really beefed up that defensive line group. We mentioned that they added Bleedy earlier in the week from Indiana, also as a Rakis from, it's been a little time at USC this spring, but prior to that, Texas A&M. So Auburn, very active adding defensive linemen this spring. Big news for them. And somebody to keep an eye on just down the road at Jacksonville State, Chris Hardy. Underrated among most, but has been incredibly productive, and so is in the high 90s in our individual player ratings. He is somebody who entered the portal this week and can expect will get a lot of action. Another player on the defensive line, but coming off the edge, big name, highly rated due to just the level, the number of pressures that he's racked up, sacks, tackles for loss, things like that. Tyler Barron had gone through spring practice with Louisville, previously committed to Ole Miss, last year played for Tennessee. Sounds like maybe Ole Miss is back in the mix for Barron, who officially entered the transfer portal, I believe, last night. So Barron was one of two Louisville transfers, former Tennessee players who re-entered the transfer portal. Wesley Walker, who had been a starter in the secondary earlier in his career, also after spending the spring at Louisville, has moved on. A couple of other offensive position players, K'Ron Lynch-Adams, who put up big numbers at UMass last season, began his career at Rutgers, has committed to Michigan State, where he is likely to be a backup for the Spartans, but somebody who certainly can carry a heavy workload. But Nate Carter, after running for 792 yards last season for the Spartans and 4 touchdowns, seemingly kind of on solid ground as the number one running back there, especially after Jalen Berger has entered the transfer portal. Berger's been limited by injury in recent years, but Lynch-Adams, 1,157 rushing yards and 12 touchdowns last season for the Minutemen. Certainly somebody who can step in and play a big role if asked to in East Lansing. One final note here, Kyle Ford. We mentioned him as perhaps being connected to Michigan, and Michigan being in need of some wide receiver depth. But there had been a lot of smoke up to that point that Ford perhaps was going to be headed back across town to USC, where he started his career. So Kyle Ford has officially committed to the Trojans, another team where, perhaps the top end of that depth chart is in pretty good shape. But once you start looking, the 4th or 5th guy on the list, it starts to get pretty thin pretty quick at USC. So adding Ford to the mix, probably mostly a depth piece, but somebody that should be able to step in and play some meaningful snaps and perhaps could blossom into even more now that USC has a lot of targets vacated from last season. So we will be certainly watching for more news as this transfer portal window is going to be coming to a close not too long, next week, I believe. And so players, of course, will be able to make decisions after the window closes. But as those start to sort themselves out, we will certainly touch on the headliners here, but we do our very best to keep up with all the news as quickly as we can in that returning production database. And we'll give an update on Friday as to where some of those returning production rankings have moved, because there certainly has been some movement. One major impact position, of course, and don't want to forget to mention, there have been a few quarterbacks who have some starting experience that within the last 24 hours have entered the transfer portal. Deacon Hill, who was technically the starter at Iowa last season, though started the season, of course, as the backup and stepped up into Cade McNamara's shoes when he went down with injury. Deacon Hill is announced that he's entering the transfer portal. More on the surprising side of things, Brendan Sullivan, who is in line to start at Northwestern this year. There's already been some thought that perhaps Iowa could be a landing spot for him, but that Northwestern team, who Sullivan was part of leading them to a surprising bowl bid last year. And then Mike Wright, who played starting snaps at Vanderbilt a couple of years ago, ended up at Mississippi State last season, had sort of fallen down a little bit in the pecking order, but very explosive runner. Curious to see where Mike Wright ends up. If he lands at a group of 5 spot, I know quite a few college fantasy football players who will be excited to learn where Mike Wright might end up. So we will certainly keep track of those players and more over the next few weeks as the portal closes, and then those final remaining free agents, so to speak, make their decisions. Moving on to some spring games. And the first team that we will discuss, we touched on it very briefly on Monday, that the overwhelming story from the spring game at Oklahoma was Deion Burks and his connection with Jackson Arnold. And Bob Prisbiolo of Sooner Scoop wrote up, some players who really stood out beyond Burks, who had 5 catches, 174 yards, and 2 touchdowns in the spring game. That included a 65-yard touchdown pass from Arnold. Now the expectations certainly are on the rise, not only for Arnold, who is stepping up into his first full season as a starter, but now for Burks, who was a little bit under the radar earlier in his career at Purdue, had a huge game early last season, but kind of trailed off a little bit, but now is one of the premier standouts of any spring game that we've discussed. He's going to be somebody who's a very, very buzzy name, and perhaps for good reason. But now expectations are high. His deep, threat ability, his speed, certainly on display, elusive in space, as Prisbolo put it. So Oklahoma fans, reading here from the piece, are officially giddy about the connection Burks is developing with Jackson Arnold. Burks appeared to be a portal hit from the start. Now we're realizing just how big. But another player who stock is on the rise this spring for the Sooners, running back Caleb Hicks. So Hicks got a little bit more of an opportunity perhaps than expected. Taylor Tatum, highly rated freshman, won't arrive until the spring. Also, Gavin Sawchuk and Javonte Barnes, both of whom have been banged up at times, weren't going to see a very heavy workload. So Hicks, as Prisbolo put it, that's how you attack an opening, with other players entering the transfer portal, with the opportunity with some of the more established players, not getting those extended reps. As he put it, it felt like we were hearing his name all spring, culminating in the spring game. His 30-yard touchdown run in the first quarter was among the biggest highlights of the event. Notre Dame, like Oklahoma, a team that looks like they're going to be featured in our top 10 in our preseason team strength power rankings, CFP Winning Edge. Notre Dame might even be making a case for the top 5, depending on how things shake out. And according to Tyler Horka at Blue Gold, Notre Dame put basically a grade A performance on the field this spring and for the spring game. It's understandable that a lot of people would be very positive about a spring game. Horka, somebody I've read a lot and feel like has a pretty good grasp on Notre Dame, really like some of the very in-depth practice reports and breakdowns that he's written in the past. So it was a little, I definitely had to look for a second opinion when going through the list of grades that he offered in 3 or 4 different write-ups about the spring game. He had the quarterbacks graded as an A, the running backs graded as an A, the wide receivers an A, the tight ends an A+, the defensive line an A+, the linebackers an A, the secondary kind of coming in on the low end at a B+, other than the offensive line, which he graded as incomplete. So in most cases, that might be a little bit too rosy of a performance or a grading, after the fact. But it was a good day for Notre Dame. And Horka definitely did give some more context to where those grades came from. But even with Riley Leonard sidelined, we mentioned his surgery earlier in the spring, and the follow-up from the injury that he suffered last season while playing for Duke against Notre Dame. But Steve Angeli, who looks like Leonard's top backup at this point, though he does seemingly have some competition, completed 17 of 25 passes for 228 yards, 2 touchdowns, and 0 interceptions. Sophomore Kenny Minchey was 12 of 19 for 123 yards, 1 touchdown, and 1 pick. And true freshman CJ Carr, who was among the biggest winners in the spring as a whole, but the spring game itself, 15 of 23 for 165 yards, 1 touchdown, 0 interceptions. Minchey looked good as a runner with 40 yards on 6 carries and a touchdown. So with Riley Leonard, again, not playing in this game, an opportunity for the Notre Dame quarterback room to show what it can do. Also, some youth just throughout the roster. Freshman Micah Gilbert at wide receiver had 2 touchdown catches. Newcomer transfer senior wide receiver Chris Mitchell, coming over from FIU, had a 62-yard touchdown, which it turned out was the game winner. Senior Deion Colsey had 4 catches in the first half of the spring game, which was good news. Sophomore Jaden Greathouse had 3 catches in the second half, all for double digits and first down. So good note there. The tight ends, mentioned they got an A+ grade. 3 healthy scholarship tight ends combined for 12 receptions, 116 yards, and 1 touchdown. Also blocked well for a group of running backs, which were solid according to all reports. But I mentioned needed a second opinion, and Brad Powers is somebody who I personally really, really respect, one of the hardest workers in college football as far as really digging into rosters and spring games. Had a few tweets over the last couple of days digging into some of those spring game rewatches, and he's a Notre Dame fan, if I understand correctly. So certainly wanted to see what he had to say about the Irish. And reading here from the tweet, despite being a program strength the last decade, the O-line is by far the biggest question mark. But talent, depth, staff, and culture, the best in 30 years. So that's a pretty rosy opinion. And all the quarterbacks look good. Leonard, of course, did not play. And the freshman class flashed, led by Carr, the quarterback, but also Gilbert, the wide receiver, and a couple of defenders as well. So some very positive feelings in South Bend for the Fighting Irish, a team that, again, we expect to be knocking on the door of the top 5 in our preseason power rankings. Very, very curious to see how Notre Dame puts it all together this year. And with Leonard certainly back and fully healthy, but sounds like even if worst came to worst, perhaps Notre Dame would be able to move forward with some quality quarterback play in addition. North Carolina was another team that we did not discuss on Monday, but quarterback competition ongoing in Chapel Hill. It sounds like Max Johnson, the former starter at LSU and most recently Texas A&M, got the first snap of the spring and seemingly played well, had moments, but it sounded like, according to Adam Smith of Inside Carolina, Cade Shoemaker, and Emma Moon of the Daily Tar Heel, that perhaps Connor Harrell had the better performance on the whole over the weekend. Reading here from Smith at Inside Carolina, Harrell came up with more along the course of the afternoon at Kenan Stadium. He threw 3 touchdown passes, highlighted by a pair of big impact moments that delivered booming plays. Though official stats were not kept unofficially, Harrell was 4 of 6 for 161 yards, averaging a little more than 40 yards per completion, connected with true freshman Javarius Green for a 68-yard TD on his first throw. Also, Nate McCullum, who right now is probably the early leader to be the leading receiver for North Carolina, on a 65-yard touchdown and breakaway run. Also had a 16-yard touchdown to another true freshman, Jordan Shipp. Those freshmen, Shipp, Taylor, also newcomer Green, were able to get a pretty heavy workload this spring as a whole, but certainly in the spring game, because on Saturday, this according to the Daily Tar Heel, injuries and other circumstances kept players like J.J. Jones, Gavin Blackwell, Chris Culliver, tight ends John Copenhaver and Bryson Nesbitt, and then also wide receiver Kobe Pesur, who there's been some reporting this week that he is continuing to have some trouble with a lower body injury that cut his season short last year. So all those players on the sidelines, it's definitely some more opportunities for newcomers in a pretty talented freshman wide receiver class. But there were some notes as well. Like I said, Johnson opened the scrimmage as the first quarterback. Running back Omarion Hampton was beside him in the backfield, but Hampton played quite sparingly. Johnson completed 8 of 9 passes for 80 yards, so very solid, but not the big play touchdown, performance that Harrell put together. Still interesting to me reading through that Daily Tar Heel piece about sort of the difference between Harrell and Johnson. Harrell has had a year under offensive coordinator Chip Lindsey. Johnson, now on his 3rd program, came in and some of the quotes that he offered, talking about, I had to learn a whole new system, be around new guys, learn names. So a little bit more of a learning curve for Johnson. Harrell, it sounds like, who also was quoted in the piece, had perhaps a little bit of a head start, and maybe that ended up paying off for him, could pay off for him if he's able to catch up to and pass Johnson for this job come fall. But quoting here, he said, it switches from learning to being able to go to the next level. I feel like I don't have to learn as much. I already have that stuff down, so I can move on to other stuff like reading defenses. So that, it sounds like, came together quite nicely in a relatively small sample size on Saturday for the spring game. Wrong note there. A few other ACC teams, including 2 newcomers. Don't forget, Cal and Stanford are going to be in their first season in the ACC. So Jeff Farado of Cal Sports Report had a nice write-up of the Cal spring game and another quarterback battle where, understandably, no decision has yet been made. As Farado put it, the least surprising response of the day, Coach Justin Wilcox declined to specify whether returning starter Fernando Mendoza or North Texas transfer Chandler Rogers will be the number 1 man 4 months from now. Quote, both of these guys have done a really good job this spring. This is from Wilcox. Fernando is a better player now than he was, and that's exactly what we're looking for. Chandler's done a really good job as well. They're different styles of player, but both of those guys can play. We just want to continue to grow both guys. Mendoza got those first snaps and played better on Saturday, according to Ferrundo. He was 6 of 9 for 92 yards. That included a 60-yard connection with wide receiver Tron Grizzle. on the first snap. Also had a 15-yard touchdown pass to Tobias Merriweather, a Notre Dame transfer. Rogers, who put up big numbers at North Texas last year, over 3,300 passing yards and 29 touchdowns. He was just 4 of 10 for 29 yards and an interception. As always, if I didn't say it earlier, if I don't say it enough, we don't want to read too much into stats from a spring game. But, 4 of 10, 29 yards and an interception, most cases is not going to be seen as a super positive day. There were, of course, several Cal players sitting out, including running back Jaden Ott and multiple defensive starters. Seemed like up to nearly a half dozen starters or projected major contributors on the defensive side of the ball were out. At Stanford, Kevin Borba of All Cardinal was on hand for what was a little bit more of a practice session, but for the Cardinal during the 11-on-11 period there, he made some notes about the quarterback room, where right now Ashton Daniels, the 10-game starter from last season, seemingly is the clear number one at quarterback. Freshman Elijah Brown, who there's a lot of excitement around as he enters college this year, got most of the second-team reps ahead of Justin Lamson, who got some significant steps, mostly as a runner last season, but also made at least one start. Was playing some with the twos, and Miles Jackson was with the threes. It looks like Cedric Irvin is in line to be the top ball carrier for Stanford this year. He had a 35-yard catch and run for a touchdown in 11-on-11 period there. To the top two, maybe players overall on the Stanford roster, but certainly in the wide receiver group, Alec Ayomanor and Tiger Bachmeier were out with undisclosed injuries. So the first-team wide receiver unit were Mudia Rubin, Ismail Sisse, and Emmett Mosley. The freshman, Mosley, was the only receiver consistently getting open, according to Borba. So perhaps pencil his name in, write that note and file it away. At Wake Forest, pretty quiet spring so far for the Demon Deacons, coming off of a disappointing year, but Les Johns and Cameron Lemons-Debrow of Demon Deacon Digest and Adam Bridges of Blogger So Dear offered some notes from the spring game, where Hank Bachmeier had a big day statistically, but Jeremy Hexlinky was very, very impressive as well. Looks like the future is in good hands at the quarterback position for Wake Forest. Head coach Dave Clawson was quoted saying, I don't want to limit it to just those two. I think Hank has picked up the offense exceptionally fast, smart, and now we get into the details of situations, and every time he goes through it, it's something new. Tyler Mazzell, I think, has had a really good camp. He's played really well, and he has elevated. And I think Jeremy is an up-and-coming talent, and anytime we can get him a rep, he learns. So he is what we hoped for when we recruited him. And that position just needs to be developed, and it's really, they need reps. And so one of the reasons it was great to be able to go to field so long, if we were able to pour so into them. So Bachmeier started his career, of course, at Boise State, spent last season at Louisiana Tech, was a little bit limited by injury, seemingly is cemented as the number one wideout or quarterback, do have some notes on wideouts from the Demon Deacons from here as well. But Bachmeier completed 24 of 40 passing attempts for 310 yards with 1 touchdown and 1 interception. Michael Kern has been out with injury in the spring, so perhaps that allowed Jeremy Hexlinky to get a little bit more action than he otherwise would, but he completed 12 of 21 passes for 204 yards and 3 touchdowns. Wide receiver Horatio Fields, according to one report, quote, looks like an absolute dude. Candidate for a breakout season after injuries derailed his performances last year, but consistently won one-on-ones and finished the day with 3 receptions for 69 yards and a touchdown. Walker Merrill was the standout statistically. He had 7 catches for 99 yards. Freshman Jeremiah Melvin had 6 catches for 72 yards, and Taylor Morin, highly experienced veteran, had 5 catches for 38 yards there. And a few other ACC teams, Syracuse, Jim Steck-Schulte of the Juice Online and Henry O'Brien of the Daily Orange were on hand, where running back LeQuint Allen was, and I just actually finished the Syracuse team profile. The running back room behind Allen is very, very thin. So Allen, who is the team's best player, was spelled by freshman Yasin Willis, who's been one of the standouts this spring. They are a bit of a thunder and lightning duo, with Willis being a heavier back. Expect that he will get a fair amount of action. Allen played just an incredible number of snaps, high percentage number of snaps, up in the 80s last year, according to our numbers. So it would be good for Syracuse in the long run, and for Allen, I'm sure, if Willis steps up and is able to take a little bit of that workload away. Willis ended with over 100 yards in the day, had 6 carries of 10 or more yards. And the wide receiver group seemingly working itself out as well. Zeed Haynes, the transfer from Georgia, was targeted 8 times by new quarterback at Syracuse, Cal McCord. He was the offensive MVP of the spring, had a touchdown among 6 catches, showed the ability to make plays on the deep ball, and also had a nifty toe tap on the sideline for a first down as well. Trevor Pena and Amari Hatcher were also big parts of the passing game in the spring. Pena had 4 receptions, all for big yardage, seemingly 23, 25, 25, and 50 yards on his catches. So big day for Trevor Pena, who's been mostly impactful as a return man in his career. Didn't play a ton of snaps on offense last season. Has a little bit of a background, I believe, as a running back as well. So maybe he'll get a carry here or there. But big part of the passing attack for Syracuse this spring. At Duke, just a few notes from Dom Finoglio of Duke Chronicle, said that among those who flashed and showed some potential star power for the future, a couple of cornerbacks, Chandler Rivers, veteran, and freshman corner Vontae Floyd. But good news is among the players who are going to be most counted on for the Blue Devils, Malik Murphy and wide receiver Jordan Moore. Quarterback Malik Murphy, of course, the transfer from Texas, and Moore, who was a quarterback prior to losing out to Riley Leonard, has converted to wide receiver, and is a personal favorite of mine. And I know, I believe Nate Marquise is high on Moore as well. Excited about what he might be able to do for Duke this year. Murphy's performance was not perfect. He did miss 2 open targets in the end zone, according to Finoglio, but did not have any turnovers. Did have some impressive throws on Saturday night, including what's described here as a near perfect toss to Moore, who hauled in the touchdown with Rivers draped on his back. Saw highlights of that on Twitter as well. And just of note for Duke, and I do need to go back and watch a replay of the spring game, but there were only 5 healthy offensive linemen available for the spring game. So good news that everybody was able to seemingly get out healthy, especially Murphy and Moore, who are going to have big roles. At Virginia, Matt Newton of Cavaliers Now, and Jackie Frenchiuli of Wahoo's 247, and Corbin Lathrop of Streaking the Lawn all were on hand for the spring game. Fairly low scoring, 17-10. A lot of these spring games so far have been somewhat low scoring, but another quarterback battle. Tony Muskett, the returning starter, and Anthony Calandria, who got a good amount of playing time last year. Those two squared off, and Muskett was perhaps the one who came out at least a little bit on top statistically, completing 10 of 18 passes for 200 yards and 2 touchdowns. They were both deep balls, big plays, a 56-yarder to J.R. Wilson and a 73-yarder to Claiborne Richards, a walk-on. Richards had a huge day, 6 catches, 118 yards, and a touchdown. The wide receiver group was a little bit limited. Chris Tyree, the transfer from Notre Dame, did not play, and Malachi Fields, who expectations are very high for him this year, he only had 1 catch, but not doesn't have much to prove for Virginia so far, or this spring, I should say. So Richards took advantage, 118 yards, a touchdown. Wilson had 3 catches for 79 yards while working with Calandria. Both of those players, of course, were with Musket. While working with Calandria, Andre Green Jr., the former high 4 fringe 5-star recruit at North Carolina, who's transferred back home to Virginia. He had 5 catches for 65 yards. Calandria finished 15 of 16 passing for 102 yards, did not have a touchdown, and neither of those quarterbacks played in the second half. Running back Noah Vaughn provided a spark for the Blue squad. He had 50 rushing yards, which led all running backs on 11 carries, had 3 catches for 10 yards as well. Few quick notes before we save a little bit of time for our team of the day. Charlotte at Boston College, who played its spring game not this past weekend, but the prior weekend, and I think just sort of slipped through the cracks for us. AJ Black of Eagle Insider noted that quarterback Thomas Castellanos was a little bit inconsistent, but that was sort of the case all spring, and he didn't really do much running, which of course is one of Castellanos' major strengths. So when, in the spring, when it's sort of two-hand touch, especially on the quarterback, if you're even allowed to touch the quarterback at all, that can kind of limit guys who really do their best work on the ground, or that threat of them taking off and running is a little bit limited during the spring. But how well Castellanos improved as a passer is certainly going to be key. Black said he had a few ugly passes, but in the red zone did throw 2 touchdown passes to Jaden State. The sophomore, Grayson James, the backup quarterback, expected to be the backup quarterback, transfer from FIU, had a terrific day, looked confident, looked mobile as well. Lewis Bond did not play in the spring. Joseph Griffin Jr. did enter the transfer portal. So the wide receiver group, a little bit of a transition period, but Skeet looks like he's likely carved himself out a starting role, and transferred Texas Tech wide receiver transfer Jerron Bradley is in line for a big role as well, but did have a couple of drops in the spring game. At running back, Detrell Jones and Trayshawn Ward, the transfer most recently at Kansas State, were the predominant running backs. Aaron Broom was out with an injury, and Kai Robichaux also was held out. I had been dealing with an injury in the latter weeks of spring as well. At Michigan State, Trevor Michael of Spartan Avenue was among those singing the praises of quarterback Aiden Childs, who, quote, showed me everything I was hoping to see. If there was any doubt that Aiden Childs shouldn't be QB1 this fall, that has been put to bed. Childs did everything today I was hoping to see, from how he looked on the field to how he was acting off the field. So Childs is certainly a Campus to Canton favorite, and really seemingly taken the reins at Michigan State after transferring from Oregon State. Speaking of Oregon State, Isaac Streeter of the Portland Tribune was on hand for a 60-minute, 4-quarter spring game in Corvallis, where there were 2 sort of evenly matched rosters. The quarterbacks, offensive line, and tight end played for both teams. And the quarterback, of course, is the position of most interest. Giovanni McCoy, the transfer from Idaho, got the first team reps, but Jabari Johnson who had been held out, but only a handful of practices due to injury, really sort of stole the show. McCoy struggled. He had an overthrow to David Wells Jr. on a couple of passes, and Trent Walker on a deep route as well. That, according to Streeter. Johnson was the only quarterback who threw a touchdown. He hit Walker in the end zone after being flushed out of the pocket in the red zone. And Johnson also showed some real ability to scramble for first downs on and extending plays as well. So according to Trent Bray, the head coach, Johnson had just 2 days of practice before really putting together a pretty impressive performance. The other expected to be primary challenger to McCoy for that starting job, Ben Branson, was held out due to injury. And then after the spring game, freshman Tyler Throckmorton entered the transfer portal there as well. At Illinois, Jeremy Weiner of Illinois Inquirer was high on Luke Altmaier, who was the starter last year for Illinois, dealt with some injuries, kind of lost his grip on that quarterback job a little bit toward the end of the year, and Josh Paddock really exploded. But Altmaier back and looks efficient, certainly looked efficient in the spring game, completed 10 of 14 passes for 116 yards and 2 touchdowns. Backup Donovan Leary threw for over 200 yards and 2 scores as well. Wide receiver Malik Elzy led the Illinois wide receivers with 6 receptions and 10 targets, on which he gained 85 yards and a touchdown. Alex Kapka-Jones led the team with 95 receiving yards on 4 catches. At running back, Aiden Lardy shined. He had 97 yards from scrimmage, including an 18-yard reception. Lardy was one of the standouts this spring. He and Josh McCoy got the vast majority of running back reps, with Caden Fegan, who is expected to be the starter this year, and Jordan Anderson both out with injuries. Pat Bryant, expected most likely to be the top wide receiver, barely played, so not big numbers for him, but a very good note is the offensive line looks like a strength. And I've read multiple reports just very, very high on transfer J.C. Davis, the left tackle for Illinois in the spring game, who Weiner said looked like the best NFL draft prospect up front. Returning starters like Chrysler, Josh Geske, and Josh Kreutz were dominant in the interior, which is good news for that Illinois rushing attack. But as Weiner noted, the defense needs more help from the portal, and our roster strength numbers certainly would back that up. Illinois, a lot of losses up front. In the secondary, looks like an area where they're going to need some help as well. All right, few quick group of 5 notes at Memphis. Jonah Dillon of the Memphis Commercial Appeal wrote about transfer Mario Anderson, the running back who spent last season at South Carolina, started his career at Division II, but Anderson didn't waste any time introducing himself to Memphis fans, as Dillon wrote. He had a 43-yard catch and run on his first touch, opened the scoring with a short rushing touchdown a few plays later. Quarterback Seth Hennigan only played 2 drives, both of which resulted in touchdowns. Pardon me. Hennigan's blue team, with those 2 touchdowns, that basically ended the scoring for them, but was enough to earn a 14-6 win. The only other touchdown came late when Harris Boyd found Demir Blankensee for a 1-yard score on the final drive. At Tulane, the Green Wave had its spring game over the weekend. Gary Smith of NOLA.com noted that the offense failed to score in the first quarter. The 3 quarterbacks who were in competition for the starting job led consecutive drives, all led consecutive scoring drives before halftime. Junior Kai Horton had a 79-yard touchdown pass to Dante Fleming on the first play of the fourth quarter. Horton finished 8 of 9 for 160 yards and 1 touchdown. He was intercepted on the final play of the scrimmage. but good day certainly for him. Oregon transfer Ty Thompson was the third quarterback on the field, but expected to very much be in the mix for starting reps this fall. He was 5 of 10 for 89 yards. That did include 2 drops, one of which, according to Smith, would have been an easy 20-yard touchdown catch to a wide-open tight end, Jonathan Kahn. The tight ends were used quite well by Thompson, it sounds like. Reggie Brown and Joshua Gones had back-to-back completions of 17 and 29 yards. Arnold Barnes had a 9-yard touchdown run for the first score with Thompson on the field. A name that we haven't talked about much this spring, Darian Mensah, redshirt freshman, was the second quarterback in the mix. He was 8 of 13 for 106 yards. Did not get a first down on his first series, but in his second series led a 7-play, 75-yard touchdown drive that included a 24-yarder to wide receiver Fat Watts and a 28-yard pass to running back Trey Cornish. 13-yard strike to Brian Bohannon in the back of the end zone as well. Quote from John Summerall, the head coach, said, "Mensah's going to be a dude. He has a lot to learn, but he has a cool factor about him. He does not panic. He does not get rattled." So Mensah been a little overlooked by us this spring as Ty Thompson, the Oregon transfer, former 5-star, and Horton, the most experienced player on the roster at the position, seemingly were the top 2, but keep an eye on Mensah. One piece of bad news for Tulane, projected offensive line starter Trey Tuggle went down in the final week of spring drills that, according to Smith, might sideline him for the season. Summerall quoted, "It looks like a long-term injury, which is unfortunate because he was having a fantastic spring and really doing a nice job. We've got to get some help at tackle." Tulane did add a former starter from Akron, Ronan Chambers, through the transfer portal. He committed earlier this spring. Boise State, finishing here before we get to Charlotte there at the end, Ron Kautz of the Idaho Statesman was on hand for the spring game, where freshman running back Sire Gaines was perhaps the maybe not biggest surprise, but Kautz led his report with just some glowing words about Gaines, including from Dirk Cotter, the offensive coordinator at Boise State, who said, "For a 17-year-old, wow, he's off to a great start." This was on Tuesday of last week. He's very impressive, not only when it comes to running the ball and yards after contact, but he's physical in pass protection. Gaines had a 27-yard gain on his first carry of the spring game. He had 45 yards on 5 carries. Also added 3 catches for 18 yards. Gaines is competing with Jumbers Dunbar for the number 2 role behind Ashton Genty, All-American candidate, one of the best running backs in the country, who did limp to the sideline after scoring a touchdown in the first half of the spring game. Head coach Spencer Danielson said afterward that he tweaked a hamstring and it's not serious, but definitely never want to see your star player limping off of the field during a spring game. The Boise State wide receiver group, which is really a deep unit, is going to be even better with Latrell Caples back and healthy, who was one of 11 players who recorded a catch in the spring game, led the team with 4 catches for 40 yards, and seemingly was a consistent check down option for former USC 5-star Malachi Nelson, who's been getting the bulk of the number 1 reps at quarterback, especially with Maddox Madsen sidelined or limited with an injury this spring. Junior college transfer and another former 5-star recruit, Chris Marshall, had 3 catches for 35 yards. Prince Strachan had 2 catches for 48 yards. And Chase Penry, who was out for most of last season due to injury, but a former Power 5 candidate or transfer from Colorado, had 2 catches for 35 yards and a touchdown. All right, we will save some notes from San Diego State, South Alabama, Utah State, which has its starting quarterback, Spencer Petras, bearing the lead there, and Arkansas State. We'll get to those on Friday. But finishing up, Charlotte is going to be in its second year in the AAC, also in its second year under head coach Biff Poggi. And pardon me, this spring, it's a totally different group of players for the second year in a row, because last year, Colorado certainly got all the headlines for the large number of transfers that it brought in. Charlotte was very much in the same category as far as just overall raw numbers, new players. But Poggi, who these quotes coming from a piece that Cameron Williams did for the Charlotte Post on April 6th, said, quote, "I think this year's group has a totally different feel as far as the team nature of football. The locker room is a lot better. Last year, we found it wasn't a good idea to get 20 to 22 guys to come in from the same high school. It's like we had two teams." I wasn't necessarily thinking along the lines of, splitting the locker room. But I certainly did notice, and wasn't the only one, that last year, just the overwhelming number of players who came from Poggi's former St. Francis Academy program in Baltimore, it was just very staggering. I compared it at the time and probably need a little bit more updated reference, but it reminded me of when Steve Spurrier left to become the head coach in Washington, the NFL, and just added so many former Florida players. Poggi kind of did that same sort of thing, and not only did it seem maybe not like the best long-term plan, even though a lot of those players were highly rated, and a lot of them transferred from places like Maryland and other power conference programs. But kind of interesting what he said there, that it sounded like that sort of divided the locker room a little bit. It was either guys who knew each other from their high school days, and then everybody else. So curious to see how, even though Charlotte, plenty of newcomers this year as well, but some of those, former St. Francis Academy guys have moved on, whether through the transfer portal again or out of eligibility and things of that nature. But curious to see how the new mix is. So Poggi, continuing here, said, quote, "We've got a recruiting department this year split into 3 areas. We've got it divided into 3 areas: high school, junior college, and the portal. So we've been evaluating players for a whole year, and we feel really good about the kids we've brought in, and of course the kids we've been able to keep as well. This is just completely different this year. Last year I saw the tape of the team but didn't truly know what we needed. This year I know exactly what we need and how to go about filling the spots we need." Quarterback is a primary area of concern for Charlotte. Quarterback play was a major issue last year. They rotated several players through, and none were super productive, quite honestly. Max Brown, transfer from Florida, is basically, I don't know if it's official that he's the starter, but everything is pointing in that direction. Poggi, again, from early April, said, talking about Max Brown, "He's an athlete. He's also a baseball player and was drafted by the White Sox organization. All you have to do is look at the film at the game he played against Florida State when he got the start with Graham Mertz injured. He is an unbelievable player. He is very smart and is learning the offense really quickly. He has great leadership skills. He has just taken over. We didn't really have a leader last year, and he is the leader for sure." So actually, now thinking about it and reading that again, sounds like maybe Brown is just the guy. Finishing here from that early April piece, and then we'll get into some spring game notes. Poggi said, "The running back room has greatly been improved. Cartavius Norton, transfer from Iowa State, he is really special. He has a low center of gravity, and let me tell you, he doesn't go down easily. But more importantly, he is very experienced." Talking about some other transfers as well. This was kind of interesting to me, outgoing transfers. Poggi mentioned Demetrius Knight is a great example. He played 41 plays at Georgia Tech. We took a chance on him. We coached him up and gave him an opportunity. He goes out there and becomes first team all conference. South Carolina came in and offered him good money. We can't compete with that. I wouldn't want to compete with numbers like that. So just sort of threw that note there at the end randomly, but thought that was an interesting one related to a lot of the transfer talk that we have had and will continue to have. But Hunter Bailey from the Charlotte Observer this weekend had some, was on the ground reporting from the Charlotte spring game where he said that, or mentioned, Biff Poggi said when talking to the media afterwards, quote, "I'm very thankful that we didn't have any injuries all spring. Nothing major. I love the team. The kids are awesome. The way they compete is incredible. It's a totally different feeling from last year, a totally different vibe. I'm very pleased and feel very blessed to be here." As he's done all spring, quarterback Max Brown got the start with the first team. And Brown said, quote, "I think we're in a great spot. I think today showed a little bit of what we can do, but I think there's a lot more that's coming in the fall. These guys have a chip on their shoulder to prove people wrong. We got a lot of playmakers in the running back, receiver, and tight end room especially. Coming together this spring was really the biggest thing we did. I'm excited for these guys." There are also some really positive words for 17-year-old true freshman Deshaun Purdy, who there were quotes from Biff Poggi and coaches and players talking about Purdy's performance this spring and in the spring game. And then a name that was mentioned in the wide receiver room, which has now added, even after the spring, Omega Blake, the transfer from South Carolina, who spent the spring at East Carolina. He is committed to Charlotte, but among the standouts at wide receiver, 6'5" JUCO signee Isaiah Myers, which Brown said, quote, "I like to call him up top Zay. That's my guy. He makes plays, and he's a great vertical threat and has great hands. I'm excited to see what he can do this fall." So how will Myers work into that receiving core? It's got a lot of new faces. Mentioned Blake, who seemed like he was going to be a slam dunk starter at East Carolina, but perhaps had a little bit of a bumpy spring. But last year played a lot of snaps, over 250 routes run for South Carolina. Last season, he had 19 catches for 250 yards and 2 touchdowns. But he's not the only recent commit. Khafre Brown, who started his career at North Carolina, spent the last year at South Florida, maybe last couple of years at South Florida. He put up similar numbers in terms of routes run, but was a little bit more productive for the Bulls in that high-octane offense. Had 27 catches for 435 yards and 5 touchdowns, which leads everybody on the Charlotte list as far as their production last year. Justin Olson, also a transfer coming in from Middle Tennessee. He had 43 catches for 450 yards and a touchdown. Jarius Mack is the leading returner from last year's Charlotte squad, was the leader with 453 yards and 2 touchdowns. That was on 25 catches. Actually, Jack Hestera, who had 3 touchdown catches, led the team, but he has since transferred out. At the tight end position, Colin Weber is back. He had 34 catches for 362 yards, but the biggest addition to perhaps the receiving group as a whole, but certainly the tight ends, Corey Dyches, who was really highly rated among basically every transfer list, a transfer from Maryland. He was targeted 60 times last year for the Terrapins, had 49 catches, 491 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Seems like he will certainly have a big role in this Charlotte offense moving forward. We mentioned Norton. He had just 343 yards on 87 carries at Iowa State last year, scored 3 touchdowns, but those numbers would have led the Charlotte running back room, where Teron Kelman and Hashawn Wilson were the leaders last season. Kelman had 328 yards and a touchdown. Wilson had 322 yards and 3 touchdowns. But the more better known names, Shadrick Byrd and Darrell Robinson, the 4-star true freshman last year, both of those players have since transferred out. Jalen Jones, who was the starting quarterback most of the year, he was actually the leading rusher with 476 yards and 4 touchdowns on 110 carries. Jones, not very good as a passer, though he did complete over 60% of his passes, averaged just 5.9 yards per attempt, had 4 interceptions and 2 touchdowns, just 646 yards. Trexler Ivy is the most experienced quarterback in the room. He completed 112 of 203 attempts last season for 1,263 yards, 4 touchdowns, but 10 interceptions and averaged just 6.2 yards per attempt. So not a surprise, perhaps, that Brown, who only played in 4 games last year for the Gators, but completed nearly 68% of his passes for 192 yards, 0 touchdowns, and 1 interception, but seemingly is able to quickly come in and establish himself as the starter there. We mentioned Demetrius Knight, that all-conference linebacker. He has since moved on. Nikhil Hill-Green, similar situation. Those two were the top 2 tacklers last year. They are both out. So Charlotte, middle of the pack as far as defensive returning production goes. They're 72nd in our numbers. The offensive side of the ball, much more movement. The offensive line we didn't even touch on, but it lost all 3 players who had double-digit starts last year, also lost 2 others with starting experience. The number's a little bit worse there. Charlotte ranks 97th in adjusted offensive production. On the offensive side of the ball, they rank 92nd overall in our most up-to-date numbers. Looking at the schedule, it's tough to start. Charlotte hosts James Madison, so perhaps that will be an opportunity there where, James Madison, one of those teams that just is on the extreme low end of returning production. Maybe that's an opportunity for Charlotte to come get a little bit of a surprise, certainly with hosting that new look team in week 1. They take a trip to North Carolina in week 2, then host Gardner-Webb week 3. Before going on the road to face a new look Indiana team, who of course is led by former JMU head coach Kirk Cignetti in week 4. Conference play starts with a trip to Rice, and then they host East Carolina before a week off. Back-to-back road games, tough matchups at Navy and its unique offense, and then at Memphis, who we expect will be the favorite in the AAC, and then they host Tulane, who of course went to the conference title game last season. Get a week off. USF, one of those teams that's very much on the rise, getting a lot of buzz, maybe an AAC title contender as well. Charlotte will host the Bulls on November 16th before traveling to FAU and then finishing with a home date against UAB. So Biff Poggi, he was confident last year. It didn't necessarily work out. I do believe that the Charlotte team will be a little bit improved. Better quarterback play certainly will be a key. There's some talent that Poggi has accumulated through his contacts, in the past, as we mentioned, but also they're fairly active rebuilding this roster continuously. And this season, those roster strength numbers probably going to stack up middle of the pack or better in the AAC. But this is a tough schedule. The non-conference doesn't set up particularly well. 1-3 is definitely within the realm of possibility in non-conference play. And then having to go to Navy and Memphis and play Tulane and play USF. UAB, I think, is going to be improved. FAU is going to be a tough matchup as well. There are no automatic victories in conference play for the Charlotte squad. And there might just be one automatic victory, even though Gardner-Webb might be a top 25 FCS team. It's potentially going to be very tough. This Charlotte team, maybe it all comes together. Maybe Brown helps sort of galvanize this passing attack, which was almost non-existent at times last year. And Charlotte takes a big step forward. Could they challenge for a bowl bid? Yeah, even though there's not, any automatic wins. They're really, in conference play at least, even that trip to Memphis, probably not an automatic loss. So a lot of games that could go either way. Charlotte could, pull off an upset here or there, certainly. But this team is somewhat volatile. Poggi, kind of an interesting cat, as I'm sure a lot of folks know, where you could kind of imagine if things don't start off well, and that non-conference schedule is tough. So that 1-3 start could really get things started off on the wrong foot. It could spiral out of control. So not sure that the overall schedule or final record is going to be much improved. I think, going from 3-9, 2-6 in conference play to maybe a 4-8 or a 5-7 certainly is in the realm of possibility. But something in that 3-9 range is still possible as well. So Charlotte, a team that I think will be a little bit better, will be competitive. Think that there's a lot to like about some of the newcomers, Brown and Norton, chief among them. Dyches certainly. But the Charlotte team not guaranteed to take a huge step forward either. So be interesting to see how it all shakes out, of course. And we will be back on Friday. So that's going to wrap it up for episode 40 of Good Morning College Football. We went a little long today, an hour 15. But we'll be back on Friday to talk AAC power rankings, probably some updated returning production numbers as well. Of course, any transfer news that we get to between now and then also. So thank you very much for joining us live. Thank you for giving this video a like and subscribing at the Campus to Canton YouTube channel. And then, of course, thank you very much to all of those who subscribe to campustocanton.com, whether it's for as little as $2.99 per month, get access to a wide range of content, Discord access as well, but also certainly those of you who get everything that we've got to offer in that all 22 package or C2C winning edge package as well, which on that note, team profiles are coming soon, just a couple of weeks away. There is light at the end of the tunnel and feeling really, really good about that early May publish date. So we'll be back on Friday. And until then, have a great rest of the week. Take care.